Ethiopia. Ethiopia was expected to provide the toughest cycling on the trip. It was a mountainous land, with peaks close to 6,000 metres. The roads were rough and corrugated, and the locals were supposed to be inhospitable to tourists. Given the only previous aggression I'd had cycling was from unhappy sheep, I felt somewhat unprepared for the challenge. The first couple of days involved a climb up into the highlands, then a rest stop in the city of Gondar. The years of attempted Italian occupation meant that the roads were good, and I confidently pedalled up the steep inclines, stopping occasionally to observe the vast scenery of Auburn Rock. Nate followed, and we rode strongly away from the group, our slim, athletic physiques ideally suited to the mountain terrain. Then, from nowhere, a stone struck the side of my bike. "Hey," said a child's voice. You. I turned to see a group of children running out of a farmhouse, hands clamped around stones, rocks and sticks. Farangi, they said, dispatching more rocks firmly towards us. You. Nate and I cycled quickly onwards, stones thumping on the road behind. Then we noticed more kids running through the fields. You, Farangi. They stopped to pick up more stones. "Let's keep going," said Nate. We'd heard about the difficulty of cycling through Ethiopia. The charity fundraising of the 1980s led to many agencies visiting the rural areas of the country and providing children with gifts such as sweets and pens. Since then, the expectation of this had remained. The white man was associated with giving, and when this generosity was not maintained, there was a feeling of resentment, hence the stones. By lunchtime of the first day, Nate and I felt like partridges on shooting day. It was going to take new levels of reserves to get through the next few weeks. We camped in a mountain village and awoke the next morning with renewed vigour, the thought of a few stones vastly outweighed by the promise of the sublime rocky landscape. However, when I emerged from my tent, the camp was looking less optimistic. Two of the riders had contracted serious gastroenteritis and were walking around like zombies as they tried to pack their tents away. Then another took 2 spoonfuls of porridge before running off to be violently sick in the trees. The rest of us looked around gingerly. I was about to tuck into a second helping of porridge when a bee landed in my bowl. Then another and another. I turned around to see everyone jumping out of their chairs and waving their hands around vigorously. Beside the vomit and emaciated figures, a plague of bees had now invaded the camp. If I was writing a Bible, this would be considered to be a bad sign. Nate and I packed up our tents and rode swiftly out of camp. Somehow on the road, everything seemed like it would be okay. The day was long, and with every calf-busting climb, small children would run alongside us, throwing gravel. You, they say to us. Money. Why you go? Why you go? Said Nate out loud, as we neared the end of our first 1,000-metre ascent. That is a very philosophical question. Why do we go anywhere? The child stopped and gave a long, solemn look. "Give me a pen," he said in response. Sometimes we did stop to give the children some sweets, even though we knew this was the wrong thing to do. People here were poor in Western terms, but still lived a self-sustaining subsistence life. Introducing sugar into their diet was no way to help. We reached the mountainous city of Gondar at around 4 p.m. after 9 hours in the saddle. It was humid, and the city was bustling with school coaches, trucks and tuk-tuks. The air was choked with gasoline fumes. Try as we might, we couldn't find our hotel, and energy levels were reaching a nadir. Then Nate noticed a sign to a road that led up a steep hill, where a glamorous hotel sat on a beautiful viewpoint overlooking the city. Another 500 metres up, our camp for the night. I pedalled fast, reaching the top of the hill in only a few minutes, then lay on the ground in front of the hotel and put my face down. A few minutes later, Nate joined me. Our nurse, Jodie, came and found us and bought us both a Coke. Nate took a few sips and then got up and started talking jovially. I felt like I couldn't move. 2 hours later, I was in bed, hallucinating. The fever gripping the camp had found me, and it was worse than I could have ever imagined. For the next 24 hours, I couldn't be more than 5 metres from the toilet. The rest of the cyclists were similarly afflicted, and the hotel rooms were full of the groans of vomiting riders. God knows what the staff must have thought of these visiting Ferengis. Luckily, we had a rest day in Gondar. So the morning after next, after a tentative breakfast, I was back on the bike. Africa doesn't wait for you, gastro or no gastro. We cycled on into the highlands, the landscape turning from arid desert rock to lush pastures, and then to deep forest. At one point, our campsite felt like a scene out of a Centre Parks brochure, until some local kids turned up and threw some stones at us. The highest point of the trip at 5,500 metres was celebrated by a bottle of Coke outside a cement factory, before a steep descent into the Blue Nile Gorge. Nate and I had become tolerant of stone throwing. However, when speeds on the bike dipped above 40 miles an hour, it became a rather more perilous prospect. Nate broke the record for the slowest descent of the gorge in history, while I was not very far ahead. On the way back up, though, the mountain goats were back with a vengeance, and this time no one collapsed at the top. How to get fit in Ethiopia. A few hundred miles later, we were in Addis Ababa, gorging on the national dish of injera, large teff pancakes covered with dollops of stew and salad, and downing bottles of St. George beer. I was still slightly sick, but had grown used to it, and Addis was such a vibrant and exciting city that it was impossible to resist. The centuries of fighting off colonial invaders had given the locals a huge sense of pride and independence. The city had grand historic buildings, the Mikado, the largest and possibly craziest open-air market in Africa, a world-class museum with the skeleton of the first human, Lucy, a lively nightlife, and the best coffee in the world. While some cities tried to resemble New York or Paris, Addis was very much its own place. We ate and drank with gusto, and I was given a birthday cake by some of Nate's friends, one of whom felt like the most attractive woman I'd ever met. It had been a long time in the desert. Then it was back off into the countryside, along with raining stones, impassable roadworks, and more perilous descents. I wouldn't have had it any other way. Ethiopia has a wonderful variety of natural landscapes and people, and to the south of Addis, where the road descended into the Great Rift Valley, this became even more pronounced. One day we were camping by a lake in the company of marabou storks and pelicans. The next we were in deepest savannah, with ostriches prancing around our tents. Then we were back into lush pastures, stopping for a lunch at a local winery. The only constant were the shouting children, hills and roadworks. Nate and I cycled together, maintaining our sanity by discussing novels and which of the riders might be shagging. Our legs may have been suffering, but the richness of the landscape kept our minds energised and happy. The same could not be said for the rest of the group. At camp there was a mutiny, with riders claiming that they were under attack and that they wished there would be another famine. Fatigue can affect all of us in different ways, and children throwing stones does not help, but perspective is a wonderful thing. These were kids. We were the equivalent of the circus coming into town. They'd had years of charities providing them with gifts of sweets and pens. If I saw a cyclist speeding past and chomping down a Snickers, I'd be tempted to throw something too. Tension simmering, we left the farmlands and headed back into the rocky desert to the border with Kenya. There was one more day camping in the grounds of a frontier town called Yabelo, and then we were over the border. I feel like this has been the hardest and the best month of my life, I said to Nate as we sat in the shade of a concrete pipe left over from an unfinished construction project. Me too, said Nate. Is there anything you missed from home? I left someone a year ago, he said, when I moved to South Africa. A guy called Stephen. I still miss him, and many things about our life in Salt Lake City. You were together? I said. We were, then we broke apart. He was tied to Salt Lake, and I had a new position at the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg. And now I'm here. I'm not sure what will happen now. He might be dating someone else. And I don't know how I feel about everything when we reach Cape Town. I don't know if I'll be ready to return to Utah or even leave Africa. Yeah, I said, I left someone in the UK as well. It wasn't too serious, but I still think about going back to see her when the journey is over. Were you in a relationship? Asked Nate. I thought so, but I'm not sure she felt the same. Maybe she's with someone else now, I don't know. We sat in silence for a few minutes, contemplating our emotional pasts and futures. A small lizard ran out of the pipe and scuttled over the deep red sand. There's still a lot of time to figure this out, I said. Who knows what will happen between here and Cape Town? Nate stood up and took hold of his bike. And who knows what will happen with Simon and the Duchess? I don't think we can break them apart anytime soon, that's for sure. Exactly. Only a half marathon left to camp. Let's get going. The campsite was in the grounds of a cheap hotel on the side of the desert highway. A foul drainage pipe ran alongside the designated camping area, and by the smell was clearly leaking. I lay my tent gingerly on the grass and was about to step inside when a few cockroaches crawled from under the canvas. I looked around, but all other suitable pitching sites were full. There was nothing else to do but put up with it. I took the final part of Ethiopia off my map, said goodnight to Nate, then went to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up needing the toilet. I went outside to find a quiet area, but found most of the hotel grounds still full of late-night revellers. There was no option but to use an outhouse, from which the aforementioned sewage pipe seemed to originate. It was pitch black inside and smelt rancid. I brought my bike light with me to make sure I didn't add to the stream of effluent swilling around the floor, and flicked it on. It lit up a cubicle covered in shit and crawling with flies and cockroaches. I flicked it off and then went as quickly as I could. Then I ran back to my tent. I didn't think I'd ever feel clean again. The next day, my stomach gurgled as I slogged the 80-mile cycle to our campsite near the border. It was another unforgiving place, a grey dust bowl, but it was at least better than the hotel. I ate some dinner, then had an early night. However, it was not long before I was out of my tent, producing all the worst possible effects of severe gastroenteritis. At least the ground was pretty good at soaking it up. Ethiopia, you got me in the end.